Kings chapter 2. We're going to try to get through this whole chapter tonight. It's kind of a long one. I didn't get to read the whole chapter last week. I hope you went back and read parts of chapter 1 that I missed out on, that I didn't get to read, although I basically preached through the whole thing. But chapter 2, we're just picking up. We're really just picking up the story that we started, I don't even know how long ago. We started in the book of Joshua, went through the book of Judges, we were through 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. Now we're in the 1 Kings, and we're at a point where King David is going to die. This is the chapter where it ends for him. And because King David is no longer going to be on the throne, there's going to be somebody new on the throne. It's going to be his son, Solomon. And when you look in this chapter, it's, I've heard before whenever somebody gets put in charge, you get promoted, you get a new position, you're a new manager, something like that. First thing you want to do is you want to fire somebody so everybody else will know who's really in charge. That's kind of funny, but some people take that to heart and they actually do it. But if you're the king, you don't fire somebody, you're going to kill somebody, because then everybody's going to know who's in charge. I mean, that's kind of the way this is going to go tonight. You're going to see in this text three things that I'm going to mention. I'm going to talk about how David encourages Solomon to be a man, and how David had a list, and he's going to tell Solomon about this list, and then we're going to see how Solomon works the list. Now, in saying all that, the title I would give the message tonight is The Establishment of the Kingdom, because in verse 12 it says the kingdom was firmly established. At the last verse of the chapter, thus the kingdom was firmly established. I'm going to show you how he established the kingdom. But the real thing behind it is this, and I'm going to get to it toward the end, is Solomon had a list, David had a list, Jesus has a list. It's a bad list. You don't want to be on this list. How do you stay off of Jesus' list? We'll see if it works. So let me read the first part here, and I'm just going to take it in bite sizes, and we'll read a little bit at a time, talk a little bit about it, and then try to move through the text. Here's what verse 1, chapter 2, 1 Kings says. As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what was written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons are careful of their way. Notice that word if. This is a conditional promise. To walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not like a man on the throne of Israel. Now you also know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me. What he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war and peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt, about his waist, and on his sandals, and on his feet. So act according to your wisdom. Do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace, but show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For they assisted me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. Behold, there is with you Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, of Bahurim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore, do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you will bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. The days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron. 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. David has been training his son, getting him ready for when he's going to be gone and Solomon's going to rule. God had revealed to David that he wanted Solomon to succeed him. And David had not just been preparing Solomon, but he'd been preparing other things. For instance, he had been putting together the work that was going to accomplish the building of the temple that David wanted to build, but was not able to build because he was a man of blood and of warfare. And so it was going to fall to his son Solomon. And so here you have David's final words that he's given to Solomon. Very important. I'm sure Solomon took it to heart. One of the first things that David said is this, verse 2, be a man. Show yourself a man. I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore. Show yourself a man. Now, there's a lot of people in this world got a lot of ideas about what it means to be a man. A lot of people would think, well, you know, you're going to cuss louder and harder and stronger than anybody else. You're going to show everybody how tough you are by just the way you verbally accost people. And you let everybody know I'm the man by the way you speak. Or some men think I'm just going to have notches on my belt and I'm going to chase after women and get all I can. And they think that's what it means to be a man. Or they're going to be bullies or jerks. Or they're going to try to be strong and show themselves strong in so many ways. They're going to have the biggest bank accounts. And they're going to have the fastest cars or the shiniest toys and all this other stuff. They got all sorts of ideas about what it means to be a man. But let me tell you something. You can think that to be a man is to drink all the alcohol you can. You can drink everybody else under the table. But anybody can drink. Anybody can cuss. Anybody can be a jerk. You want to be a man? Try not doing that stuff. You want to find out what's hard? It's hard not being like that. Everybody's like that. Do the opposite and see how it goes with you. See what people say to you and how they treat you and how they look at you. You want to know what David means by be a man? He says it in verse 3. This is the answer of what it looks like to be a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God to walk in his ways. In other words, obey God. Now that's hard. You need God's help to do what God's calling you to do here, but God will help you do it. Keep the charge of the Lord your God. Walk in his ways. Keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn. David knows that you're not going to be successful as a man, as a person, as a human being in life in any way if you walk in disobedience to God. That is a definition of failure. And I don't care how much money you got in the bank, and I don't care how many toys you got that are shiny and beautiful, and everybody else wants what you got. Doesn't matter. If you're disobedient to God, if God's not happy with you, what difference does anything else make? And if God's happy with you, it doesn't matter if you don't have two nickels to rub together. You're good, because God's favor, God's smile is upon your life. God's hand is upon you. You're blessed. Because in this life, you're going to lose it all anyway. But in heaven, God will give you eternal rewards. Be a man, live for Jesus, and understand what's important in life. You know, we're talking about Solomon here, and I'm going to build on this, and I'll go ahead and set it up here. David's leaving, and the son of David is going to take over. Now, his name is Solomon. But you can draw a parallel line, maybe, which I'm going to try to do, and say things that we see here are things that maybe we can take and look at Jesus and say the same thing about him. In the sense that he used to identify himself as the son of David, and he's right. He came from David. And every king that comes after is leading up to the ultimate King of Kings, the Lord Jesus Christ himself. So can I take and start to already think about what it means to be a man and what David is saying, and say about Jesus, of all the men that have ever been men, the manliest man that's ever been has been Jesus. A lot of people think about Jesus as being weak and small and feeble. Jesus was tough. Jesus was a real man. You don't get nails put in your hands and feet and a whip on your back and a crown of thorns on your head if you're not tough. I mean, other men would have melted. He set his jaw like a flint and went to the cross for our sin. He knew what his Father wanted him to do, and he did it even when it was hard, even when it was tough, and even when it hurt. Jesus is the perfect man. And if you ever want to model your life after what a real man is, you don't look to Arnold Schwarzenegger and you don't look to Rocky Balboa or any of these others. Look to Jesus. You want to be a man? Jesus will show you how to be a man. He loved children. He was kind to people. He smiled a lot. He was happy. But he was a man. You can be those things and be a man. He loved his father. He knew theology. He knew the Bible. He was a man. Jesus is the perfect model for anybody to look to. And while Solomon is commanded here by David, saying, keep the commandments, keep the law, and he even reminds him in verse 4, he says, because if you do these things, you're going to have sons to follow after me. You know, he reminded him of the conditional promise which he spoke concerning. He said, if your sons are careful in the way to walk before me in the truth in their heart, you'll not like a man on the throne of Israel. In other words, everything is really dependent on whether or not you're going to follow after God. Because in a little while, he's going to establish the kingdom, and he's going to do it through a sword and through bloodshed. But you can kill all the enemies you want to. If God doesn't want you on that throne, if God's not happy with you and he says you're out of here, you're going to be out of here. And so the main thing is God happy with you? Is God pleased with your life? Is God's favor upon you? And that was the most important and the most critical thing. And so for Solomon to be a man, he's going to be told by David, keep the commandments. But if you know the story, he doesn't. Because in the end, he falls away. He begins to marry outside the faith, take on pagan wives who worshiped idols and drew him into their false worship. Solomon would not finish the way we would have liked. But again, he is the son of David, but he is not the ultimate son of David. You're going to see with every single human being, every single man, every single leader, that because we're all sinners, we all fail and fall short in some way. Other than Jesus is the only one that's ever been perfect. He's the only one that will never fail. And so the promise that's made to Solomon, if you do these things, your line's going to keep going. You're going to be able to stay on the throne. Your children that come after you are going to be able to rule and reign. But here's what we know. There is a king who will never fail, who will never sin, who will never have a reason to be cast off the throne, and he rules and reigns forever. He's now seated at the right hand of the Father. He's been raised from the dead. He's returning one day. He's going to rule and reign over this earth for all of eternity, over all the people of God. He will be their king. He'll never be off that throne. The promise to Solomon was conditional. The promise to Jesus is eternal. He reigns forever. Be a man. Be the son of David that you're supposed to be. And the call for us is, number one, look to Jesus, the ultimate son of David, who's the ultimate man, who never went against his father. And for you and I, follow the example that David said here and understand what it means to be a man. And you and I also follow after God with all our heart. Then it goes on, and David begins to work on his list here. And he starts telling Solomon all these names of these people. The first one was Joab. You may not remember the story of Joab, but you probably remember some of it, if not all of it. Joab was David's right-hand man, in a sense. He was his number one general. He was the leader of his army. And he was very helpful in a lot of ways. But boy, when he was bad, he was bad. He was a murderer. He murdered two men that David names. And he murdered another one that David said, don't you touch him. Do you remember who that was? It was Absalom, David's own son. Joab's the one that killed him, going against David's own orders. Joab was a guy that was reckless. He was rebellious. And David said, you got to do something about him. You see, if you're going to establish the kingdom, you got to do something with rebels, don't you? You got to do something with rebellious people. Didn't Jesus say a nation divided against itself is not going to stand? If all you got are people that are against you, always fighting against you, you're never going to be able to accomplish a whole lot. All you're going to be doing is trying to stay alive and defend yourself the whole time. For your nation to be established, it needs to come together as one, as a unit, have a reason and a purpose, and move forward together. But when you got traitors in your midst and people that are disloyal and supporters of your enemies, and they are enemies themselves, you take them out and it makes the nation stronger. That's what our nation does. We put traitors to death. Well, Joab's a traitor. He's gone against his king. He's a murderer. He shed innocent blood. And David, although he was king, probably found himself not even strong enough, although he was a king, to do anything against Joab. I'm suspicious. I don't know if we're going to get to heaven one day and realize this or not. I'm suspicious David may have in the past, because this is his, I think it's his nephew. May have been his cousin. I think it was his nephew, Joab was. But he may have entered into some kind of covenant relationship with him. But the Bible doesn't say it. I'm just kind of suspicious in the back of my mind, because I don't know why David never touched him. He may have never touched him because David knew his mama, that's my aunt or whatever like that, and I can't put her son to death. I don't know. But he deserved to die. He was a murderer, and he should have been put to death. And what does the Bible say about innocent blood? It cries out from the ground. You can't shed innocent blood. It was always a thing in the mind of the Jewish people. They always knew you cannot shed innocent blood. This is why they were so worried when they arrested Jesus and knew he was innocent. They tried to find a reason to convict him and say he was guilty of something. They lied on him and did everything else. And finally, what did they get him for? They said, well, you're a blasphemer. You claim to be the Son of God. But it was true, and he was innocent. You don't shed innocent blood. Joab shed innocent blood, and the blood cried out from the ground, and it stained the ground. And the only way to cleanse it according to the law of God is you've got to put that person to death. And you know, you've got a king here that is being told you need to be just, you need to be righteous, you need to do what's right. And it's not just going to be a way to cleanse the land, but it's also going to be a way to establish the kingdom. Because you can't have somebody like Joab that thinks he's stronger than the king that's going to do what he wants to and get away with it. Not only that, but if you'll remember from last week, Joab was also one of the ones that allied himself with Solomon's half-brother that wanted to become king. Remember last week we talked about who's in charge? God was in charge. God chose Solomon. Adonijah, who we're going to see in a minute, the brother, drew Joab in as one of his allies. Joab needed to go. Other people that were on the list were good people. You saw in verse 7 the sons of Barzillai. These people helped David. So there's not just a good list, but there's a bad list, but there's a good list too. Then he goes on to verse 8. Shimei talked about him as well, and what he did. And Shimei really wanted David dead, and he cursed him really bad, and if he could have, he would have killed him. He would have let other people to kill him. Shimei's a bad dude. He had people that he could influence. He was a Benjamite. The king that was before David was a Benjamite. So he could get in that family and in that clan and begin to manipulate and say some things. He's a guy that really doesn't need to be around. And again, you may think, well, all right, so David's got this list, and you want the kingdom to be established, but is it really right to put people to death? But that was actually a capital offense that he should have been punished for and put to death. David showed him mercy. But I guess maybe I should add this into it, just to, because I'm about to talk about a lot of people getting slaughtered here. You know, people sometimes say things like this, you know, only God can judge me. Do y'all realize that when Jesus gets back, that's the first thing he's going to start doing is judging everybody? He talks about the angels coming and dividing the sheep from the goats. You can read about it in Matthew 25. And he goes through and talks about, well, these over here, they did good to me. Well, when did we do good to you? Well, when you saw me hungry, you fed me. Well, when did I do that? When you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. Well, you visited me in prison. You gave me clothes to wear. You did all this stuff for me. But there's these others over here that didn't know God and didn't serve God and didn't love God. And in the end, they get cast out into outer darkness. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Or the better place to go would be to go to Revelation chapter 19. Guess who's coming back on a white horse with a sword in his mouth, that when he speaks, the blood's going to come up to the horse's bridle. You know what he's going to do when Jesus comes back? He's killing a lot of people. You say, Jesus? Yeah, Jesus. You're going to establish a kingdom. You're going to get rid of all the enemies. That's how it gets established. No rivals to the throne. No one that ever wants to overthrow the king. When Jesus establishes his king. By the way, in heaven, don't you want to know that the devil's gone? Your enemy's gone? Don't you want to know that everybody that follows the devil and is evil and all the murderers and the rapists and the liars and the cheats you just go down a list of whatever you want to, of all the sins you could think of. Isn't it going to be good that in heaven God's gotten rid of all that? And anybody that doesn't want to follow Jesus, doesn't want a new heart, doesn't want their sins washed away, would rather sit in their sin and stew in their filth, if you'd rather have that than Jesus, you're not going to go into God's perfect heaven and mess the whole thing up. It's just going to ruin it for all the ones that do love Jesus and want to be there. You want to live in a time when you don't have to worry about locking your doors. You don't have to worry about somebody hitting you over the head and stealing what you got. You want to live in a good, perfect place. Well, that's what you're going to have in heaven. But one of the reasons you're going to have it is because he's getting rid of everything bad. And so, you see, a little foreshadowing of this now. The son of David's coming to the throne, and what's bad is going to be gotten rid of. Now, again, this is God's prerogative. It's not ours. We need to be sharing the gospel, loving people, trying to win them to Jesus, telling people that God sent his son to die on a cross for our sin. He rose from the dead, giving people an opportunity to repent and be saved. But in the end, God's going to work it all out. And if people decide they don't want Jesus and they reject his offer and his plan of salvation, and they just want to go live their life their own way and do their own thing, and they don't want Jesus as Lord, guess what? He's got a list. There's a list in heaven, the Lamb's Book of Life, and if your name is in it, you're good. He knows everybody that's ever going to trust in him and love him and want to follow him and believe in him. And if your name's not on that list, there's another judgment seat for you. So you got to be ready. You got to put your faith in Jesus. You got to not be on Jesus' bad list. So David's got a bad list here. He's sharing his list with Solomon. He said, Solomon, you got to do something about these people. You want your kingdom to be established. You want to move forward. You got to get rid of the bad here in order to make any kind of progress and be established. So David slept with his fathers. And Solomon, verse 12 says, sat on the throne of David, and his kingdom was established. So I told you, we get to the end of it. How do you stay off Jesus' bad list? Well, let me show you 4 characters right here at the very end that were on Solomon's bad list. And let's see what they did wrong, and maybe let's learn from it what we don't need to do. Here's what it says about Adonijah. This is Solomon's half-brother. This is the one that has already tried to steal the throne from him. And what we found out last week was Solomon showed him mercy. The Bible says, now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, do you come peacefully? He said, peacefully. Then he said, I've got something to say to you. She said, speak. So he said, you know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel expected me to be king. This is when he tried in chapter 1 last week to take the place of his brother. He about succeeded. He said, however, the kingdom has turned about and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. Now, remember last week what we talked about? We hammered this nail over and over again. Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Who's in charge? Who was in charge of the whole thing? God was. Who did God want to reign over Israel? He wanted Solomon. He didn't want this guy. And I told you, I said, you're going to see next week, he knew what God's will was. David had already announced it. David and Solomon were kind of co-regents ruling together at that time until David passed away. Everybody knew Solomon's supposed to be king. As even his own brother said, it was his from the Lord. But this guy doesn't care what the Lord wants. He doesn't want God's will for his life or his kingdom. He just wants to be king. He just wants to be in charge. As we said this past Sunday, on the heart of everybody is either a throne or a cross. If you're on the throne, you've got Jesus on the cross. This guy wants to sit on the throne. He doesn't want God ruling, sitting on the throne of his heart. But he knew it was his from the Lord. Verse 16, now, I'm making one request of you. Do not refuse me. He said, speak. She said, speak. Then he said, speak to Solomon the king, for he will not refuse you, that he may give me Abishag the Shunammite as a wife. Now, if you remember last week's story, if you weren't here, let me fill you in. David was sick. He's old. He's cold. He can't get warm. And some guys decided, hey, let's get a pretty girl and put her into bed with David and warm him up. Now, it sounds funny, but that was the plan. So they found the most beautiful girl they could, Abishag, and David never knew her in that kind of way, but she was kind of a nurse to him and took care of him. And now David's passed away, and there's this pretty girl, but everybody in the country, all the nation, would have looked at this girl as part of David's harem. Remember, he had more than one wife, And you also had different levels of wives. You had wives and you had concubines. They would have probably seen her as one of David's concubines, part of his harem, even though he never had relations with her. And I'm bringing this up for a reason, because this guy Adonijah, he's slick, and he's trying to make a move here. Even though he lost, we saw last week in chapter 1, he's trying to find a way to worm himself back into this position. Let me remind you of three things that we've read already going through the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. There have been times, such as when the guy Abner that we saw that got killed tried to take King Saul's concubine to himself, and Saul's son, who was trying to rule then, lost his mind over it. Why? Because if you take the king's concubine to yourself, you can't do that unless you're the king, is the point. It makes you look like you have succeeded the king when you take his wives to be your wife. It happened again when David took over and became king. He took Saul's, the king that was before him, took all of Saul's concubines to himself. And then when David's son Absalom tried to take over the kingdom, you remember when he took all of David's concubines to the roof and he raked them in a tent up there. And he took those to himself. What is he trying to do? He's trying to stake his claim. These are now mine, just like the kingdom is now mine. And he's saying, I am the king. You take the king's concubine, you're saying something about yourself. And so this guy comes up and says, hey, how about go to your son, Bathsheba, and ask if I can have Abishag as a wife? Now, if he gets her as a wife, everybody in the nation is going to say, scratch their head and think, well, okay, this guy must be also co-regent. Like there's King Solomon and there's King Adonijah. They're going to assume something about it. It's his way of making a claim to the throne, hoping he can be slick, nobody's paying attention, and he can get away with it. And I don't know what world Bathsheba's doing. She's got to know this. So I don't know if she's playing along or if she's just happy because she gets to be a matchmaker. But she's going right along with it. She's not going to make her son very happy, though. Verse 18, she said, very well, I'm going to go speak to the king for you. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. The king arose and met her and bowed before her and sat on his throne. And he had a throne set for the king's mother. She sat at his right. Then she said, I'm making one small request of you. Don't refuse me. The king said to her, ask my mother, for I won't refuse you. So she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah, your brother, as a wife. King Solomon answered and said to his mother, and why are you asking Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him also the kingdom. Why don't you? That's what he means. For he's my older brother. In other words, he's the older brother. He'd now have the king's concubine as his own. It would make him look like he's the king now. Even for him, for Abiathar the priest, for Joab the son of Zeruiah. These are all people that were allies of his brother that turned against Solomon. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, may God do so more so to me, and more also if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today. And King Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him so that he died. Last week, Solomon showed his brother mercy. Should have killed him. Rightfully, he could have killed him for what he did. But Solomon said back in verse 52 of chapter 1, he said, if he's a worthy man and not one of his hairs is going to fall to the ground. But, he said, if wickedness is found in him, he will die. So what did Adonijah do wrong? Well, he was one of these people that God showed mercy to, and the king showed mercy to, and he had a chance, and instead of continuing in the direction he should have gone in, he continued to go against the king. Now, there were times when Jesus would heal somebody. Do you remember that there was somebody down at the pool of Bethesda, couldn't walk? Jesus healed, and then John chapter 5, and then Jesus says to him these words, now go and sin no more. In other words, this guy must have done something that got himself into a place where somehow or another, it's what it kind of reads like, that God might have punished him for that sin, and that might have been why he was crippled. And now here Jesus comes along and heals him, and he says, all right, now go sin no more. Because what's going to happen? If you do it again, you're going to get what you had. You'll be right back where you started. In other words, there's an opportunity here, and the opportunity is he could now see Jesus as the answer, the salvation, the solution. He could put all his faith in Jesus. He could receive not just physical healing, but eternal life. But instead, Adonijah, who could have done the same thing with Solomon and could have said, you know, my brother, he's been merciful to me. He's been so gracious to me. I should be dead right now. I tried to get away with something here. I tried to overthrow the king, and I lost. I failed. I should right now give all the rest of my life and devote it to help Solomon and help him establish his kingdom and be the best citizen I can be. And instead, what does he do? He tries to come up with some other scheme and get right back in there and do the same thing and get in a different way. Some people receive mercy from God. Some people we're praying for on our prayer list tonight, God might heal them, and God might help them in some way. And maybe they don't know Jesus. And instead of recognizing what God does in their life, but because you prayed, they might just turn right back around and go right back and live a rebellious life against God again. Some people receive mercy, but they don't take it where it's intended to go. This guy didn't either. By the way, let me just throw this out there before I move on. Do you remember when David sinned with Bathsheba? And Nathan the prophet came to him and told the story and said, you know, this guy had a little lamb, and his own lamb he got. Somebody came in and to a neighbor's house, and the neighbor was a rich guy, had a lot of sheep. But the neighbor went and took this one guy's little lamb, slaughtered it, and fed it to his friend instead of taking it from his own. And David says, he's going to have to repay fourfold for what he did. He was angry about it. And Nathan said, what? You're the man. Because here's this guy, he's got one wife, and you got all these wives over here. And instead of you, taking what God's given you, you took from this other man. Now he's dead. You've taken his wife and all this stuff. And what did David say? The one that did it deserves to pay fourfold. That's David's fourth son that died since then. This is the last one. But when Adonijah dies, that's it. What David said against himself actually came to pass. Verse 26. We saw with Adonijah what happened. He received mercy, but in the end he walked away from it. That'll get you on the bad list. Here's another one, Abiathar, verse 26 and 27. Now Abiathar the priest, the king said to him, go to Anathoth, your own field. If you know Anathoth, that's where the prophet Jeremiah is from. He's probably descended from this guy. It's a priestly town. He said, for you deserve to die, but I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with my father, in which my father was afflicted. So Solomon dismissed Abiathar from being priest to the Lord in order to fulfill the word of the Lord, which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh. That happened at the very beginning of the book of Samuel. God made a prophecy. There was a prophet and a priest, Eli, who was turning wicked, and his sons were really wicked. And God said, I'm taking the priesthood away from them. I'm giving it to another. That prophecy is fulfilled. That's like great-great-granddaddy to this guy. But here's this guy, Abiathar. And let me tell you how he got on the bad list. If you were to go back and read through the story again, what you'll find is his name mentioned throughout. He was one that was with David for a long time, followed David faithfully, and he went through some tough stuff with David. And he started well, and he was faithful for a long time, but he didn't end well. And it got him on the bad list. That's why he lost what he lost. You need to be real careful, if you've been real faithful for a long time, that you don't get to where you coast at the end of your life. You need to make up your mind, I'm going to finish well. I'm not going to, at the end, throw away everything that God's been working in my life for all these decades. A lot of people don't finish well. Abiathar, in the end, when Adonijah, Solomon's brother, tried to turn against him and overthrow the kingdom and take the throne for himself, Abiathar sided with Solomon's brother. Remember, who's in charge? God's in charge. Who did God choose? God chose Solomon. Solomon's the leader. Solomon's the king. Solomon's the one that rules. Understand this, if you go against the one God chose, whether it's David or Solomon, you're going against God. Abiathar went against God, went against Solomon. Didn't work out. He doesn't end well. He lost his ministry. He lost everything because of it. Let me move on real quick. We're running out of time. Verse 28. There's this Joab guy again. Here it is. He's finally going to get what's coming to him. Now the news came to Joab, for Joab had followed Adonijah, although he had not followed Absalom. Joab fled to the tent of the Lord, and he took hold of the horns of the altar. Remember, that's a place of refuge going back to before cities of refuge were built. That's where you would go and grab a hold to and hope for mercy at that place. It says, it was told King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord, and behold, he is beside the altar. Solomon sent Benaiah. Benaiah, by the way, he's like Solomon's Joab. He's his number one right-hand guy. He's his chief general. He's one of David's mighty men. And by the way, he's also a priest. So he's a warrior priest, but he's of a priestly family. Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, saying, go fall on him. In other words, go kill him. So Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, thus the king has said, come out. So he didn't want to kill him there in the temple. He said, but no, I'm going to die right here. And this guy was rebellious all the way to the end, didn't he? He's not going to obey anybody. He's not going to do anything you tell him to do. So even here, his last act of rebellion, I'm not coming out. Kill me here. So Joab, thus he spoke, and he answered me. And the king said to him, do as he has spoken, fall on him and bury him, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab had shed without cause. Now let me just stir your memory a little bit if you've been with me for a while going through this. Do you remember at the end of 2 Samuel the story of King Saul and the Gibeonites? Saul had turned against the Gibeonite people and slaughtered them just because he didn't like them. They weren't the same race as him, and he didn't want them in the land. But they had made a covenant of peace with Israel, and nobody should have ever come against these people if they didn't have a reason to. You know, if the Gibeonites didn't rebel and rise up first. They were in a covenant relationship and had made a peace treaty with Israel. King Saul broke it, slaughtered a bunch of them, and at the end, the blood of those people and the blood guiltiness was on the land. And the only way that it was ended up being cleansed is David had to give Saul's sons, King Saul's sons, that were still living, over to the Gibeonite people who hung them between heaven and earth. And that was the way that the blood that was shed was atoned for, in a sense, or the price was paid to make up for it, for what Saul had done. In other words, the land is polluted when there's the shedding of innocent blood. And let me just throw this out there before I move on. That's still true today. America's polluted with innocent blood that's shed here. And God calls it to account eventually, when he's ready. But by the way, in a lot of different ways we've polluted the land. Abortion is one of those ways, but it's not the only way. So what does Solomon say here? That you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab shed without cause. The Lord will return his blood on his own head, because he fell upon two men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword, while my father David did not know it. Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jethro, commander of the army of Judah. So their blood shall return on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. But to David and his descendants, in his house and his throne, may there be peace from the Lord forever. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up, fell on him, put him to death, and he was buried at his own house in the wilderness. And the king appointed Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over to the army in his place. And the king appointed Zadok, the priest, in place of Abiathar. One to go, but understand this. Even if you had been someone that had shed innocent blood, the way that you had the blood off of you is to put your faith in Jesus. And instead of you dying for the blood that you shed, you let the Son of God, Jesus, die in your place, atone for your sin, and then you're free from that sin, and you're free from the guilt and the penalty of it. But that's the only way to make things right with God now. You dying for your sin isn't going to do much. Jesus dying for your sin will get rid of everything. Last one, Shimei, then we're done. Joab, he was never submissive. He was defiant, rebellious, disobedient. That's how he got on the bad list. He stayed there. You had Adonijah that walked away from mercy. You had Abiathar. He didn't end well. You had Joab. He never had a heart that was really trusting in David to be his king. Joab always wanted to be the one that calls the shots. And now this guy Shimei, the guy with the filthy, vulgar mouth. It says the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, build for yourself a house in Jerusalem. In other words, I'm going to keep you far away from the Benjamite people that you could influence in a bad way. Let me keep you here where I can keep an eye on you. He said, live there and don't go out from there to any place. For on the day you go out and cross over the brook Kidron, you will know for certain that you're going to die. Your blood shall be on your own head. Now, Shimei knows that Solomon could put him to death and probably should put him to death. He deserves to die. David said he wasn't going to kill him, but now there's a new king, and Solomon could. So, again, he's been merciful here and giving Shimei a chance. But it's not going to last. This dude's a goof. He's not going to make it. Shimei said to the king, the word is good. And so he's excited about this. He's not going to die. He gets to live. He says, as my lord the king has said, so your servant will do. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem many days. But it came about at the end of 3 years that the two of the servants of Shimei ran away to Achish, the son of Maacah, the king of Gath. Man, that's a lot of words. I'm glad I don't do sign language and have to do that. Shimei said, behold, your servants are in Gath. Then Shimei arose, he saddled his donkey, and he went to Gath, to Achish, to look for his servants. And Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath. Now, he knows he can't do this. The only thing in his mind that he might be able to get away with is if you leave Jerusalem, you go through the Kidron Valley, you're really going toward the Mount of Olives, and you're going east. Gath is west, so maybe he's saying, well, I'm not going to cross the brook Kidron, I'm going to go in the other way. But he knows he can't leave Jerusalem. He knows exactly what the spirit of what Solomon said is. So he's just thinking Solomon's not paying attention anymore. Years have gone by. Nobody's watching. Let me go get these guys. So it was told Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath, and he had returned. So the king sent, and he called for Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord, as Solomon warned you, saying, you will know for certain that on that day that you depart and go anywhere, you shall surely die. And he said to me, the word which I have heard is good. Why then did you not keep the oath of the Lord and the command which I have laid on you? The king also said to Shimei, you know all the evil which you acknowledged in your heart, which you did to my father David. Therefore the Lord shall return your evil on your own head. The King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. How did he get on the bad list? Well, he bowed his knee, he called Solomon Lord, and he promised to obey. Did he do it? No. It's all talk. One day, Jesus is going to say to many to call out to him, Lord, Lord. He's going to say, I never knew you. You weren't Lord to me. Shimei is like that. He's a guy that really, if he could, he doesn't want anybody from David's family ruling. He wants King Saul's family back on the throne. He hates them. He wants them all dead. Doesn't want to call him king or Lord. You want to establish the kingdom? Get rid of people like that. So the king commanded Benaiah. This dude's good for something, isn't he? You need a sword. He's got it. Commanded Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. He went out and fell on him, and he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. Friends, you don't want to be on Jesus' bad list. One day you're going to him or he's coming to you. You want to meet him one day knowing that his blood has washed away all your sins, that you are a follower of his and you're part of his kingdom. And if you call him king and believe in him as Lord, you're good. And if you try to work your way to heaven or get to heaven any other way other than Jesus, you're not going to find that it's going to go very well for you on that day. Jesus is king and he's got a kingdom. He's got a good list. He's not Santa Claus, but he's got a bad list. And when he comes back, you want to be found in him, not in anything else. He's going to establish his kingdom. And the Bible says he's going to establish it in righteousness. And the Bible says he'll rule and reign with a rod of iron. It's going to be a good day when Jesus reigns on this earth so that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Until then, may God's will be done in our lives and in our heart as we seek to serve him until he comes. Let's pray together. Father, Thank you for your people, for your word, and for the blessings of life that you give us. God, help us as we leave here to take the mission field, to be bold witnesses, to be those that share the gospel, and those that look for Jesus to be glorified in all ways in our life. We love you, Jesus. Thank you for loving us. And may when you come, may you come quickly. We ask it all for your name and your glory's sake.